Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbity Bobbity Books. My name is Ellie and this is going to be my April reading wrap up. Okay, so I think I'm going to just dive straight in and go for the wrap up straight away because I've got quite a lot of books to talk to you about today. So let's just get straight to it. So the first book that I read was Into the Sunken City by Dinesh Thiru. This is a young adult sci-fi book and it's set in the future where Earth is slowly sinking into the seas because it's continually raining. So no one can actually remember what the sky even looks like because it's just been covered by clouds for as long as anyone can remember. And we're following our main character, Jin, I think her name is, and she has basically sworn to never go diving again since her father died in a diving accident, and she has had to take on this role of being a parent or guardian to her younger sister Tara. And the plot starts to get going when this mysterious pirate-like character called Billy shows up and offers Jin and her sister the score of a lifetime. So basically she wants to acquire them and to bring them into her crew to go and explore the sunken city of Las Vegas and to raid it for the gold that is still hidden there. And at first our main character Jin is obviously very anxious about this. She doesn't really want to do it. She's sworn that she'd never go diving again and she's very aware that this is a dangerous mission. But when her sister Tara decides to take Billy up on the offer, our main character of Jin is forced to go along with her to make sure that she is safe. And so we follow this ragtag crew as they assemble and they go together to do this heist, to dive down and explore the hidden depths of the sunken Las Vegas and to try and break into the vault to get all of the money and the gold that's still stashed down there. And I think the main reason why I was drawn to this book in the first place is because of the setting. I love the idea of there being a world that is slowly sinking into the seas. I love the fact that it was an underwater heist because I love things that are set underwater. I find it so creepy but also so fascinating. And those are the things that I really loved about this book, but I just wish that it explored the world building in a bit more depth because I really wanted to know more about why this planet was slowly sinking into the seas. Why is it raining all the time? I wanted to know how the technology works in this world because they have these really high-tech diving suits and I wanted to know more about that. I wanted to know more about humanity and how they've managed to survive in such hostile conditions. And just none of that was really explored in any depth. I just feel like this was just a cool setting for a heist story and the focus was much more on the heist plotline itself and also on this kind of drama and tension between our main character and her ex-boyfriend because of course her annoyingly handsome ex-boyfriend is part of the crew that's going on this mission to explore Las Vegas. Because it's a YA novel and apparently that has to be in there. And I just didn't care for all of that romance drama and I just feel like that's something that's very present in a lot of young adult novels, and because it's written for that target audience and I just feel like I've grown out of this genre a little bit. I just don't think YA books resonate with me as much as they used to, and probably just because I'm a bit older now and I'm just not as interested in all of that drama and stuff. So I was a little bit disappointed with this one. I feel like it felt a little bit flat. That being said, I did enjoy some of the scenes underwater. Like I said before, I really enjoy things that are set underwater. I find the whole concept of diving and exploring things underwater in the hidden depths of the ocean like really terrifying but also really fascinating. So I did find those scenes quite atmospheric, but I will say you do have to suspend your disbelief a little bit because our characters in this book could like surface really quickly without having to depressurize or anything, and I think the explanation for that is that it's because it's set in the far-flung future where they have these really high-tech suits that mean that you don't have to do that. And that's okay, but it felt like a little bit of a an excuse and a reason why our characters could escape really quickly and things like that. And I actually wish that our author lent into some of the limitations of diving, because I find those ideas really intense and scary, and that's some of the reasons why I enjoy reading books that have a diving element to them, because the idea that you can't just surface really quickly, that you have to depressurize your suit, and all of those things are what makes it so intense. So I kind of wish that that wasn't just like brushed over with the excuse of they have these high-tech suits, because that could have been really cool and really interesting. But yeah, it does talk about some other themes in this book as well. Of course, it talks about grief, because our main character is processing the loss of her father. She's also having to take on this new identity as a guardian to her sister and the sole provider for her sister. And so there's quite a lot of talk about how much she's had to give up in order to protect her sister, but also this idea of having to let her sister grow up for herself, make her own decisions as well, because she's very overprotective of her. So there's quite a lot of interesting themes in here, but I personally felt like they were dealt with quite surface level, and again I just wish that it explored these things in more depth, because it had so much potential. It could have done so much more, and I just feel like it didn't. But if you just want something that's fun, and if you enjoy like a heist type storyline, then maybe check this one out, particularly if you are a fan of YA. The next book that I read was A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. So this is the first book in a pretty well-loved fantasy series. It's a classic fantasy series. I think that it was first published in 1968, and so it's been around for a long time, and it's been hugely influential to the fantasy genre. And so I was really excited to go back and read this work, because I'm a fan of fantasy, and I really wanted to go back and see where some of these ideas originated from, and to just have a better understanding of the genre and how it's developed and what it's been influenced by and things like that. So I was really excited to go back and read this story. I would describe this as a fairly standard coming of age story. We follow our main character Ged, or it might be Jed, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name, but he's a young sorcerer, and he is quite a show-off. He's quite arrogant, he's quite impulsive, and because of that he ends up doing something a little bit stupid, and he's trying to kind of prove himself and accidentally unleashes this shadow upon the earth. And this shadow is basically hunting him down, and the story is about him having to face the consequences of his actions in a way. And yeah, I feel like this has a lot of fantasy tropes that we are familiar with, probably because this influenced so many other works within the genre, but this includes things like a magic school, a bitter rival, it's got dragons in it, and it has a very atmospheric setting as well. I think the thing that I enjoyed most about this book was the descriptions and the descriptive language, because Ursula K. Le Guin has such a fantastic way of describing things. So I want to just read you a little bit from this book, just to give you an impression of her writing style. So there's a moment in the story where there's this character who is producing this piece of magic to try and impress someone, basically. And it says, Jasper worked an illusion charm for her. A white tree he made sprang up from the stone floor, its branches touched the high roof beams of the hall, and on every twig of every branch a golden apple shone, each a sun, for it was a year tree. A bird flew among the branches suddenly, all white with a tail like a fall of snow, and the golden apples dimming turned to seeds, each one a drop of crystal. These falling from the tree with a sound like rain, all at once there came a sweet fragrance, while the tree swaying put forth leaves of rosy fire and white flowers like stars. So the illusion faded. The Lady of O cried out with pleasure and bent her shining head to the young sorcerer in praise of his mastery. I mean, come on, that's so beautiful, isn't it? That description of this beautiful piece of magic, this amazing tree with all these golden apples and them turning to seeds and dropping and there being this fragrance. I don't know, it's so atmospheric. I love Ursula K. Le Guin's writing style. And it's been really interesting seeing how this book has influenced some more modern fantasy stories as well. For example, in this book it talks quite a lot about the power of names, and that's something that you see quite a lot in other fantasy books as well. In particular, I'm thinking of The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, so it's quite interesting seeing some of those things in here. But I will say there is a lot of travelling in this book, and the pacing felt a little bit off for me. And I don't know, it's a strange one because I feel like there were some really exciting scenes in here, but they pass by very quickly. So for example, there's a confrontation with dragons that happens in here, which is really cool, but that only takes a couple of pages to resolve, and then we've got 20 more pages of our character just travelling the world before we get to another exciting point. So I just feel like there were interesting things dotted with long passages of just travelling in between, and because of that I just found I really struggled to find momentum, and I didn't have much motivation to pick up this book. So even though it's quite short, it did take me a really long time to get through. I also found the ending of this story really quite underwhelming. I feel like it was building up to this big thing that was going to happen, this confrontation and this resolution, and I was really excited to see it. And then when it eventually happens, it's over so quickly, and a lot of it happens off page because for some reason we switch points of view to a side character, and so we don't actually see it happening. And I was just so frustrated by that ending. So yeah, I have mixed opinions about this one. I thought it was really interesting seeing, you know, some of these ideas and where they came from, and I liked some of the writing style in here. I liked the descriptions, but I found the pacing to be really off, and I also struggled to get on board with our main character because he is deliberately painted as being quite annoying and arrogant in the beginning, so that we can see his character grow throughout the book, because it is a coming of age story and he does develop some humility as he sort of goes through this journey. But because he's painted as being quite an annoying, kind of insufferable character in the beginning, I found it hard to get on board with him, and so I wasn't that invested in his story. So yeah, I had positives and negatives with this one, but I am very glad that I read it, and I am of course interested to read more of Ursula K. Le Guin's writing because she has such a fantastic way of describing things. The next book that I read was How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamastu. So this is actually a book that my friend lent me, and I'm glad that I read it, but my goodness, is this a dark book. So please check out the content warnings before going into this one, because I actually found it quite difficult to read. It is very heavy stuff in this book. So basically this is a science fiction book, and it's a series of short stories that are all kind of interconnected in some way, and it's basically about a pandemic that happens and how humanity is trying to rebuild after this global pandemic. And when I say dark, I mean it's really dark. Like, one of these stories is talking about a euthanasia theme park for terminally ill children. Like, there's some heavy stuff in here. Lots and lots of themes of grief and loss and miscommunication and things like that. So it's dealing with a lot, and the author definitely took a risk with this book, which I do respect, but unfortunately I found it a little bit too heavy. It was kind of like reading a bit of a grief fest, really. It was very heavy. I did have to keep putting this one down because it was quite a lot. But yeah, it was an interesting story. It was definitely very thought-provoking. I particularly enjoyed some of the stories in the beginning, and they did make me tear up a few times. They are very moving. But I did also find that these stories were quite repetitive, and I did start to lose interest towards the second half of this book because they had the same sort of themes and the same kind of almost like plot beats to them. It was this repetitive idea of there being a strained parent-child relationship, and of grief, and of missed opportunities and poor communication, and it was kind of the same thing again and again from different characters that weren't distinct enough for me to feel like they needed to be in there, if that makes sense. I feel like once you've heard that kind of a story from a certain number of people, it became a little bit repetitive. So I don't know, I didn't really have a brilliant reading experience with this one, but I appreciate the risk that the author took. And I do know that a lot of other people really do enjoy this one, so please don't let me put you off if you think that it sounds interesting. But yeah, very thought-provoking, but also just very sad. Okay, so after reading How High We Go in the Dark, I needed something that was going to be a little bit lighter, and so I reached for Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. So this is one of his secret project books, so it's one of his books that he released, I think, during lockdown. I think he wrote them during lockdown, and he released them without letting fans know much about each book. It was all very much like a secret, and there was a lot of hype built around these books, and they're all set within his wider Cosmere world, but they are standalones. And this one is really interesting because it's very different to a lot of Brandon Sanderson's other books in terms of the style. I think it says in the beginning that he wrote this one for his wife, and he was really heavily influenced by the film The Princess Bride. And it definitely has that tongue-in-cheek, slightly silly, slightly campy humour in it. And that did remind me a little bit of the movie The Princess Bride, which I do really enjoy, by the way. But yeah, this is such a delight. It was such a perfect, uplifting story to follow on from How High We Go in the Dark. And this one follows our main character, Tress, who is a young woman. She's just an ordinary girl, really. She's a window washer and she enjoys collecting cups, and she's very happy with her simple life. She has a best friend, Charlie, and they start to grow close. They start to develop they start to fall for each other, really. And Charlie just so happens to be the Duke's son, and the Duke doesn't like the fact that he's getting close to Tress, and so he sends him off to go and court some other princesses and to find a more suitable bride. And during this quest, when he goes off and he travels away, he ends up getting captured by a evil sorceress, and so Tress decides to go and rescue him, and she travels across the Emerald Sea to go and find him. And of course, this is a Brandon Sanderson novel, so it's not a straight up environment. There's lots of cool elements to the world building. So for example, the sea isn't like a normal sea in this book. It's actually a sea that is made up of green spores, like kind of like green, almost like grains of sand, but they're spores. And if these spores come in contact with water, they actually erupt into these plants. So they're actually really dangerous. And I don't know, it's a really cool setting. There's also other spores as well, all different colours. So there's different coloured seas that are made up of different coloured spores, and they all react differently to water. And it was really fun finding out about each of them, and like the creative use of these spores within this book and within the plot was really cool. And I just loved our main character. I love how resourceful she was, how resilient she was, and I loved seeing her character development as well when she kind of had this opportunity to leave her island where she's lived for her whole life and to have new experiences and start to realise that she has hidden talents that she didn't realise that she had before. And there's a real fan family element to this story that I just loved as well, and it was just a fun time. It didn't try to do anything more than that. It wasn't trying to be anything more than just a fun fairy tale like story, and that's exactly what it is, and it delivered. Oops, my camera died, so I'm really sorry about that. I just had to go and switch out the battery, but I think I was just rounding out my thoughts on this book. Basically, I really enjoyed it. It was a fun time, and I think it's important to note as well that this book is actually narrated by the character Hoyd, who is a character who pops up a lot in Brandon Sanderson's books, and he definitely breaks the fourth wall on occasion and will talk to you directly as a reader, which is a little bit silly. I feel like it might not be a style of writing that works for everybody, but I think it worked well for this kind of story. And yeah, it was just a fun time, really. I don't think it's anything groundbreaking, but it was also just a really lovely story, and I just really enjoyed my time with it. The next book that I read was actually a little horror novella, and it's A House at the Bottom of a Lake by Josh Malerman. So this is a very strange book, and I actually think it's best to go into this story without expecting too much. Like, it is a horror, but don't go into it expecting lots of really intense horror scenes because it's not that kind of story. It's more just a weird, strange, creepy story that gets under your skin, if that makes sense. So in this book we follow two teenagers who are getting to know each other, they're going on dates and they're falling in love for the first time, and it's about their blossoming romance, but it's also about this kind of infatuation and this obsession that they have with this house that they find at the bottom of a lake. So basically on their first date they go canoeing and they find this hidden lake, and at the bottom of this lake is a house, which of course makes no sense. We don't know why this house is there. It's very bizarre, and they spend their entire summer getting to know each other but also getting to know this house, and they dive down and they explore the sunken rooms of this house, and it doesn't make sense at all. Like, the house is fully furnished and everything is exactly in its place, which just doesn't make any logical sense because it's underwater, so things should be floating, and it's all a bit weird. It's all very unsettling and eerie, and I find the idea of man-made objects sunken under the water to be really creepy for some reason, and just diving down and being in this weird situation, it's really bizarre but also just deeply unsettling. And it definitely has a lot of themes of first love and infatuation and obsession and things like that, and I just really enjoyed it. I flew through it. I couldn't put it down. There are some scenes that are so vivid to me, and it's kind of almost beautiful in a way but also very eerie, and I just really enjoyed this one. It's very strange. It has a very ambiguous ending. It's almost a cosmic horror type vibe, if that makes sense. So don't expect to have all your questions answered by the end. It has an open way of interpreting things, and I think that might not necessarily work for everybody. But if you want something that's just a little bit strange, a little bit speculative, maybe a little bit bizarre, then maybe give this one a try, because I ate this one up. I enjoyed it so much. The next book that I read was another horror novella, because apparently I was in the vibe for that, and it was Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson. So this is a short horror story that has a cottagecore aesthetic, which is something that I didn't think would work, but it does somehow. And it's so short that I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil anything, but basically we follow this woman who's at a bit of a loss, really. She's in a bit of a rut after she's broken up with her boyfriend, and she's kind of floating. She's not really sure what she's doing, and she ends up going to this farmer's market, and she meets this woman who runs one of the stalls, and this woman sells homemade cupcakes and homemade little soaps and plants, and she's very quaint. She dresses like with a cottagecore aesthetic. She wears like floaty dresses and she's got long blonde hair, and our main character sort of instantly is attracted to this woman, and they form a friendship that develops into something more. And yeah, we follow their romance basically and their journey getting to know each other, but there's constantly this edge of something really not being quite right, and it's so interesting because it has this very whimsical setting. We've got this cottagecore vibe, you know, this character who makes her own soaps and who lives in a farmhouse, and there's all these descriptions of nature and things like that, but then you do have this really dark edge to it. So I really enjoyed this one. It was a really fun time, a really quick read, and perfect for the spring season. So if you're looking for a spring book but that has a very dark twist to it, then I would recommend this one. I had a fun time with it. Okay, and the next book that I read was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Bennett. So I actually filmed a dedicated reading vlog for this book, so I'm going to keep this very brief. But basically this is the classic, isn't it? It's a well-known, much beloved classic children's story, and I read it for the first time and I enjoyed it. I do feel like it's important to preface it by saying that there are some problematic themes in here just because it was written such a long time ago. So unfortunately it was written in a time where racism and sexism and classism was very common, and so some of those things do creep into this story, so just be mindful of that. But it's also a story about healing, really. So we follow a young girl called Mary who's a very spoilt child. She's basically given everything that she ever wants. Her parents didn't actually want her, and so she's raised by her servants in India, and they pander to her every need because they want her to just shut up and be quiet basically, and so she doesn't really have any friends. And then one day her parents die of cholera and she has to move to England to be with her uncle, and she moves into this grand manor house, and again she's not really got much to do while she's there, so she spends a lot of time outdoors, and she discovers this secret hidden garden which has been closed up for the last 10 years, and she decides to bring this garden back to life with the help of some friends. And it's very much a story about her character development, really, her starting to change her opinion of herself, but also her thoughts and feelings about others. She starts to question the way that she presents herself, and she also just enjoys the fresh air, and it's a celebration of springtime. It's a celebration of the outdoors and the healing power of nature, but also about the importance of friendship, the importance of having a meaningful activity in your life. It's also a little bit of a discussion about grief and loss and anxiety, and how your thoughts can affect your feelings towards yourself, but also can affect you physically, and it can affect the way that you connect with others. So it does pack quite a lot into a small children's story, and I did really enjoy it in the end. Okay, and the final book that I read was A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J Maas. This was a reread for me, and I read it on audio with my husband because we're filming a series where basically I make my husband read the ACOTAR series, which is so fun. So do keep an eye out for the next video in that series because it should be coming out very soon. But yeah, we both read this one. I read this first book a long time ago, I actually tabbed it, and I really enjoyed it the first time I read this book in this series. It's actually the series that got me back into reading because it was just so fun, such an escapism for me. And this second book in the series is definitely my favourite, and it's been so interesting going back and rereading this one, especially with my husband, because I don't know, I feel like my reading tastes have changed quite a lot. This is a young adult fantasy romance, and I don't really enjoy young adult anymore really, and fantasy romance just isn't really my thing anymore. So it's been kind of strange going back and rereading these ones, but it has been really fun being back in this world and being back with these characters. The first book is basically a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and this second book has a very different feel to it. The world opens up a lot more. There's a big change with the romance plotline in here, and we also get introduced to a lot more characters in this second book, and that's why I loved it so much, because the characters are just so lovely. It's got such a found family element at the heart of this story. The chemistry between our main character and the love interest in here is second to none. It's so great. Sarah J Maas is really fantastic at writing good chemistry, and so I just loved the romance in it when I read it for the first time, and I really enjoyed being back with these characters in this second book. I will say, if I pick this one up now, having not had that positive experience before, I'm not sure I would enjoy it as much as I did the first time, if that makes sense, just because it's not really my thing anymore. But it was really fun being back in this world, and the second book is definitely miles better in my opinion than the first book in this series. And yeah, you'll have to keep an eye out for that reading vlog where I read this with my husband. But yeah, it was a fun time being back in this world. So yeah, that's the last book that I read in the month. So that brings me to the end of this video. I had quite a good reading month. I read quite a lot of chunky books actually, so I'm quite pleased with my reading. I hope that you enjoyed hearing my thoughts and feelings. Please do let me know if you've read any of these books before and what your thoughts were, because I'd love to hear them in the comment section down below. I always love to chat with you in the comments. I hope that you are all doing fantastically. I hope you're having a fabulous time. I hope you have also been having a really good reading month, and yeah, don't forget to like this video if you did like it, subscribe if you want to see some more from me, and I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye!